Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or are a founder, CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and of course, I'm here with Mike Simmons, the co-founder of Catalyst Sale. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody.
Mike, it's so good to be back with you, and we've been focusing on common questions that you've been getting about sales. I'm going to wrap a few questions into a topic rather than give you individual questions. I'm just going to say a lot of people want to know more about prospecting and outreach. So rather than put that in a question, I'm going to say, Mike, let's talk about that today. And where can you take us?
Yeah, prospecting and conducting outreach and anything that you're doing to generate business is I think a really important aspect to, or is a core focus, of most sales roles that are out there. Now, there are some folks who are in account management roles, and I would say that they prospect within their existing account base. So it still impacts them, and they should be conducting outreach and building their network within their existing account base. Now, there are also some sales reps who respond to inbound inquiries. So they're not focused on finding opportunities on their own. They get a lot of inbound activity. And I have never been in a role where I've been fortunate enough to have that kind of activity. I aspire to get there at some point in time. And we try to do that with Catalyst Sale and some of the content we put out there. But the majority of the business that I've generated in my career and as an individual contributor has been through direct outreach and identifying prospects, identifying people that I'd like to have conversations with, and then helping to move the sales process forward from there. So for this episode, I think we'll focus on outreach and prospecting, and some of the parameters we'll put in place are we are talking about a sales rep or a founder inside an organization that is working in an emerging market and is trying to identify customers that they should be working with and people that they should be working with. We are not talking about inbound activity.
Okay, that's good to make clear. So let's look at that then, where we've got somebody that wants help with prospecting. They want help with outreach. And where do you start? If that's what somebody comes with you and they say, Mike, I just feel like I'm not strong here. I need to get better at prospecting. What's the first thing you tell them?
Well, the first thing I do is I ask a question. I ask, how do they define prospecting? Because context is important. And I know we've talked about that on a couple of different episodes, how important context is, and that's kind of a cop out for me to say that I asked the question, but I do. I want to understand where they are coming from. So if you're out there, for the person that's out there listening today, the first thing to do is assess your current situation. And assess your current situation could be, how do you define prospecting? How do you define outreach? How do you define your business development process? So ask that question of yourself. And then the next question I want to know is, what are you doing today? So what activities are you doing today? How do you find customers today? And once I've got that information, then I can start asking some questions around, have they considered some of these other ideas? And those are some of the practical pieces that we'll get into as we continue the discussion.
If we have somebody new in sales, I think one of the problems is, you said, what are you doing today? Which really means you should be taking action. But here I'm new and I'm not quite sure what to do. And so I'm waiting for somebody like you, Mike, somebody with all this experience to just lay it out and say, this is what you need to do. But tell us, is that good? Is that bad? What action should we be taking?
Yeah. So, I think it's a good question. It's good perspective. So let's say I'm brand new and I'm responsible for identifying customers that I could potentially work with. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to be really careful about going too broad. I need to be very, very focused. If I try to go too broad, the risk is that I may end up taking a lot of action or doing a lot of activity that doesn't pay out. And before we turned the mics on, we started talking a little bit about the difference between catching crab and fishing for salmon. Two completely different activities, and two different approaches. And one, you set something up and you wait for someone to kind of stumble into the trap. And in the other one, you're actively hunting, you're actively putting your fishing line where you expect it to be. Or if you're grizzly bear, you're catching them in your mouth. But there's an active thing that's happening. So from an activity standpoint, when it comes to prospecting and conducting outreach, the first thing I want to understand is who cares about the problem that I solve today. So if I'm in the security space and I'm focused on end user awareness, I want to identify those people inside an organization who are focused on minimizing risk inside their organization. They understand that security is a potential threat inside their organization. They understand that end users inside the organization might open doors for that threat to come in. So I may be looking at people in an HR role. I may be looking at people in a compliance role. I may be looking at people in a risk role. I may even look for someone like the chief information security officer inside an organization. So I want to identify the people who care about the problem that my company solves and are dealing with that problem on a day in, day out basis.
Okay, that's a great place to start. And we lay that groundwork. Where do you take us next?
Yeah, so once I've identified the role that I'm looking for, then I start doing some searches. And I go to, the common place today is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource. We use Sales Navigator for this. And one of the first things I'll do is I'll do a search for a specific role. If I'm in a given territory, let's say that my geography or the territory that I'm responsible for is based on geography, and I'm focused on people who are interested in information security in the Phoenix metropolitan area. So I start doing some searches, I create filters in a tool like Sales Navigator, and that filter might be CISO, Phoenix, Arizona, Chandler, Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, maybe Gilbert, Arizona. And that should help me take this view from having to boil the entire ocean to a much more focused niche. And I've got some individual people who now I've been able to identify. The next step that I want to go through is then look at, are those people inside organizations that align with the profile that I'm targeting? Let's say that not only is my territory companies that are based in Phoenix, but I'm also looking at companies that have between 500 and 5,000 employees, which is a pretty broad range. Well, I can filter the results out a little bit further here and identify those people who are in a given role, in a given set of cities within organizations that are range between 500 people and maybe 5,000. So that allows me to become even more focused. And then I look at it and I see this list of companies that they're associated with. When I see the list of companies that they're associated with, what I try to do is identify companies that I have something in common with, either because I purchase their product and I'm a consumer of their product. I see their building on the way to work every day. I know somebody who might work inside that organization. But I start to take the data points that are available so that I can isolate things down even further so that I'm really only focused on a handful of people at a given point in time, because now here's where the really hard work happens. I have to start conducting research. I have to get an understanding of who the individual is inside the organization, what their background is inside the organization, validate that they may have the problem that we can solve, and try to find some context for that direct outreach. And we've talked about this in the past on the Why You Now podcast around outreach. And we talked about some tactics there about how to deliver that context and get responses. And we'll include a link in the show notes for it. But that's my process. I start big, I compartmentalize and start to shrink things down, and then get to a point where I can be very direct, very targeted with the people that I'm making contact with.
I'm going to turn back to your fishing mention. So you talked about crabbing versus salmon fishing. And now if we take what you just said, I think you've moved us from trying to fish by just throwing out a net over and over and hoping you grab something to fishing with a single line, trying to get just what we're looking for rather than anything we can grab. And I think this is really important to realize and discuss, in that this moves from just taking action. We want you to take action. It's better than sitting there waiting for someone like Mike to say, look, this is exactly what you have to do. So action's better than doing nothing. But now Mike's moving us towards progress, towards finding exactly who we need to reach out to. And Mike, I think this is a great spot to be, where we've moved from tossing out the net to casting an individual line, going for exactly what we're looking for. So one, either comment on that or take us on to the next spot.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on it. In that casting out the net, you're just anticipating that something is going to come to you and that they're just going to get trapped and they're going to get caught up inside this net. And now maybe your family eats tonight, or you're able to serve food at the restaurant, or whatever reason you're out there catching something in a net, you're able to fulfill that obligation. The risk there is it's a bit more passive than I like to be. When we start talking about this other approach, this more direct approach, there's specific intention. What I'm focused on is quality over quantity. What I'm focused on is being able to, like you had said, being able to be very deliberate in the progress that we're going to make and the information that we're going to learn. So when it comes to this communication, so now we start talking about the tactics. Is it an email? Is it a phone call? Is it a letter? Is it a asking for help from somebody else inside your network? Or is it some other approach? There are multiple approaches that you can take to make contact with the person that you're interested in talking to. Yeah, nobody wants to be sold to, and nobody wants to be marketed to. And everybody is out there trying to sell something to somebody and market something to somebody. I mean, you just look at so many of the broader tactics that are out there. They talk about, here's the right subject line to use to get a higher open rate on your mass emails or your marketing automation. Here's the language that you should use in each of these emails. And they start to get into these really templated approaches. These are not personal to the individual that you're contacting. If I want to talk to the Chief Information Security Officer at Intel, I should know what that person's name is. I should know what role they were in before their current role. I should know what companies they've worked for previously. I should know where they've shared their focus or their mindset in the marketplace. So these could be blog posts, they could be interviews, they could be discussions with others. There's a great podcast around security out there right now with Mike Johnston and Dave Spark around CISO and vendor relationships. And we'll include a link to that podcast as well. But you should be very targeted and deliberate as it relates to what you know about the person you're making contact with. Because in order to justify the conversation with that person, you've got to get them to a point where they feel confident or comfortable trading their time for some kind of something that they're going to get from you. And that value could be insight that you have in the marketplace. That value could be how you solve this problem that you know exists. It could be that you're helping reveal the problem to them. So depending on where you are in the market, whether you're with an emerging technology and you're selling a lot of vision, or you're working on something that's really well known and addresses a challenge that everybody is aware of, your approach is going to shift and be very personal to the person that you're contacting and that you're talking to.
And I'm going to bring this back to salmon fishing one more time, because once a park ranger, always a park ranger, that when you're salmon fishing, you can do things slightly different if you're going for a king salmon versus a coho salmon, because some of them they hunt a little differently. And so as you're saying, if you're targeted, you're deliberate about the type of person you want to contact, the type of person you want to start reaching out to, it's the same thing. If you do things just slightly different so you can target, you're going to put the right thing in front of the right person.
Yeah. And Jody, as you describe that, I've never fished for salmon. I mean, I fished for salmon at at the local Sprouts or Costco or wherever I am at the time. But I know where I'm going, and I know where I need to go, and I know how I can get that thing that I want. So I'm very deliberate. So it's a very deliberate approach. I'm not hunting with a fishing rod and some line and a lure. I'm hunting with a shopping cart and credit card and a Jeep. But the point that I hope everybody gets from this, and the one that we're trying to reinforce, is these are deliberate actions. They're not activities just for the sake of being busy and talking about high level numbers of the number of communications that you sent out or the number of meetings that you had or the number of whatever. These aren't activities on that side. These are very direct, targeted actions. So when you have that discussion with the chief information security officer and you send the outreach to the chief information security officer, make sure the context is there, because that context is going to be the thing that helps you get in the door. And it's going to help you differentiate yourself from every other person who is sending that person an email or leaving a voicemail or sending a direct message on Twitter or sending a direct message on Instagram. Remember, the ability to access folks is better today than it ever has been. There's more ways for you to connect with others in a way that they want to connect. We've been very direct with everybody relative to Catalyst Sale. Contact us via Twitter. Send a tweet to @Catalyst Sale or @Simmons_M or @MConnorAZ, and you will get a response from us. You can call my cell phone, 480-772-7448. I may not always pick up. I don't usually pick up if I don't recognize the number, but I will check my voicemails and I will get back to you. But there are easy ways for people to get in contact with others. I still get these sales calls, though, where if I pick up the phone or I respond to an inquiry, the first question is, so tell me a little bit about your business. If you go to catalystsale.com, you can find out just about everything you need to know about our business. If you listen to the podcast, you can find out just about everything you need to know about our business. Don't waste your time with the prospect by asking questions that you can find the answer to in some other medium, unless you're intentionally trying to validate that information and validate the understanding.
That actually reminds me of something Lee Cockrell, who's been a guest on this show, said recently. What, not to me, he said it to someone else, but I really took note of this. And he told somebody in a very candid, caring way, he said, don't ask me anything you can Google, meaning we only have so much time together and you don't want to use the time you have with me to ask me a question you could have found out the answer to on your own, because then you could have asked better questions. And it's the same thing here. When you get the chance to get in front of a prospect, don't ask them something you could have found out prior to that phone call.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So Mike, this has been great. This has been very helpful, especially to somebody just starting out saying, I'm not sure what to do. I need help prospecting. You've just laid it all out, but give us one final thought about prospecting.
Remember, it's about the customer. It's not about you. So many people are out there slinging whatever it is that they have to sell. When you're going through this prospecting effort, what you're trying to do is you're trying to discover the people who care about the problem that you can address. And the way that you discover that, there's public information, but there's also a lot that you're going to be able to gather in that brief conversation that you have with them. So remember, ask more questions, listen more. You know what is in your head. You know what your capabilities are of the product. What your job is to get an understanding of what the customer is challenged with, how they're addressing that today, and then putting your solution in the context of what's important to them. And you can't do that unless you really understand your customer and make that transition, that shift from I'm just going out there, going through the motions, to I'm actually taking a very strategic, targeted approach to the way that I work with my customer base.
All right. Wonderful, Mike. Well, Mike gave you ways you could reach out. You could call him, send a tweet, whatever. But if you have a question about prospecting, something that we've talked about, reach out to Mike and we'll go deeper on it. Or Mike individually will go deeper on it with you. And if you think that you know somebody that would benefit from this podcast, please share it with a colleague or a friend. And if you want to start a conversation, just tag us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. We're in all those places. So thank you so much, Mike, and thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.